Okay. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Eumans weekly meeting. The meeting is live on Zoom and recorded on YouTube. So also hello to everyone who is going to watch this afterwards. So the meeting of tonight has a goal that is very timely with the calendar because 9th of May was, as usual, Europe Day, but this time signed also the end of a process that Eumans followed quite carefully since way before it started, which was the conference on the future of Europe. It was a process that was announced back in 2019, I think, was supposed to start in May 2020. And because of the pandemic, there was the risk that it didn't happen at all. And then it started officially May 2021. And it's a significant moment for the European institution because for the first time, we can say, there was a very dynamic process that involved the three different EU institutions, as well in a more formalized manner, citizens through citizens panel that were drawn by lot, partially, and a digital platform that was that accompanied the development of the proposals of the conference on the future of Europe. Eumans followed the process before it started, and then was among the founders of the coalition Citizens Take Over Europe, which had been one of the main actors in monitoring the process of the conference, pushing for some changes that were developed through time, and now is working on an adequate follow-up of this deliberative process. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to analyze together the meaning of the conference on the future of Europe, the meaning of it in the context of two of the biggest challenges that the European Union faced recently. One is the pandemic, and the other one is the war in Ukraine, which of course, once again, are pushing the EU to rethink its own functioning in the interest of the citizens, to look at the competencies of the European Union, the need of progressively the increasing awareness that the nation states' decision-making process are not enough, and that the actual framework of how the European Union works needs to be revised, or at least this is what is also the result of the conference on the future of Europe. There are some keywords that, particularly for those that are less accustomed to the technical, let's say, interpretation of what happens at a EU level, might seem daunting, like treaty changes, like changes in the competencies, like the European Convention, which is something that the civil society is strongly advocating for. So the purpose of tonight is, together with Maarten De Groot, who is one of the most active activists for democratic reforms in the EU and a key leader in the Citizens Take Over Europe coalition, in analyzing the conference on the future of Europe, but also imagining what is the role of citizens now that this moment at a conclusion, but also needs a follow-up. We will try to do this. It's an opportunity for us as a movement to understand what is at stake, what is possible to achieve together with other organizations that are more closely involved in this process, but also what citizens can expect now and can do now. So for the agenda of tonight, I decided to invert the order. So instead of giving Marco the floor as first after me, I think it's good to start with Maarten to give us a bit of analysis, reflections, to also not have a myth of the conference on the future of Europe, but a very fact evidence analysis, and also to discuss together which actions the coalition that Eumans is part of, Citizens Take Over Europe, is working on, so that we are all more aware of what is happening. On a note for the Eumans community, the element of citizen assemblies is of course something that can be one of the output of the conference. We have seen also, we shared it on our social media channel, even Ursula von der Leyen said that it's good to have citizens more involved in the decision-making process of the EU, but the purpose of tonight is to look at everything with critical lenses and an eye on the actions that are possible from now on. So the floor to Maarten De Groot from Citizens Takeover Europe and any other organization you want to mention, Maarten. And we do around with Maarten, maybe a first reaction from Marco, and then let's keep the floor open for questions, comments. If you don't feel comfortable speaking English, you can either write and I can try to translate, or since we are a small group, you can speak in Italian and I'll try to make a simple translation of what will be said. Maarten.
Thank you very much, Virginia, for, first of all, the invitation to join you here today, and to Eumans for your great work, both inside the Citizens Takeover Europe Coalition and outside. Yeah, my name is Maarten De Groot. I'm a member of the Citizens Takeover Europe Coalition, also a member of the ECI campaign, which is also a member of the coalition. Pronouns he, him, and yeah, great to be here today. I will try to keep it concise. The overall, I try to just sketch a picture of how I look at the conference and what happened here, because I think for in particular for sort of so-called outsiders, it's a pretty opaque process, and it's pretty difficult, both perhaps for insiders and outsiders, to maybe point out how significant is it what happened here really, how meaningful is it. And I think it's useful to look at the conference as a form of group therapy for politicians, essentially. And why is that? I would say it is a form of group therapy because it hasn't been since the early 2000s, since the convention of the early 2000s, that national and EU politicians have come together in a structured process to talk about the future of the EU, essentially. That hasn't happened since the early 2000s. And a lot of other things have happened since the early 2000s, because what we know, what happened with that convention, the outcome of that convention was voted down in referendums in the Netherlands and in France. So that's resulted in what some people call a constitutional trauma. Then, of course, we had, for example, in 2015, we had a negative referendum result in Greece on the bailout deal, which arguably is another trauma of the EU. We had the Brexit vote, which is another trauma on top of that. We have the rule of law crisis, which is another, I would say, institutional trauma. So we have a lot of, I would say, forms of institutional trauma in the EU, which fostered also distrust very much between politicians at the national and in the EU level. So first and foremost, I would say that the conference has been an attempt to bring those politicians at various political levels together. And unlike the talk about a citizen-centered process, there's a lot of talk about having citizens at the center. I mean, I think in order to understand the significance of this process, you arguably, and this is also one of the limitations of the whole conference, this has been very much about politicians, essentially, and getting them back around the table and getting them to develop arguably a more constructive attitude towards the future of the EU, and thinking, is there a future for the EU even? Or do we have to give up, basically? Do we have to start all over outside of the current treaties? I think these are still questions that are open, but this is more or less the context that I would like to sketch to understand what happened here. So if this is a form of group therapy, what are its strengths and its weaknesses of the whole process? Well, in terms of strengths, you can say it's a good thing it happened. The group therapy happened. They got together in Strasbourg, politicians from national EU level, as well as citizens, local regional authorities, social partners, civil society actors, all of them got together. So that by itself, you can say, is an achievement. Then you can say no one walked away. From the three institutions, no one walked away. yes, at the very end of the process, two far-right groups said that they withdrew their participation in the conference, but I will put that aside for the moment. No institution as such walked away. And then thirdly, what is another achievement you can say is there is an outcome. It was not a given that there was the possibility to arrive at a consensus among all of those actors, whatever that may mean, consensus. But now at least there is an outcome. There's a document with 49 proposals, 325 measures, recommended measures to change the EU. But now let's look at the limitations of this process. I think one of the limitations is that it's been a highly controlled process. It was a highly controlled setting. For example, the experts that were invited to give input for the citizens panels, they were supposed to be neutral. They could not be too extreme or too radical in their views, which arguably is a very technocratic approach towards participation. I think a lot of deliberative democracy experts would say we need opposite views, we need contrasting views, but there's no such thing as a neutral perspective on the future of Europe or a neutral attitude. So I would argue it's been very technocratic and very controlled. Another thing connected to this is that I would argue that it's a process that very much scratched the surface only. Yes, to some extent it has allowed these sort of institutional traumas that I refer to come to the surface and to interact with that to some extent, and they got together. But there are way more fundamental traumas in European society and in global society that have not had any place in this conference due to its highly controlled setting and to the lack of regard for those more fundamental societal traumas. And I would mention here racism, colonialism, forms of societal oppression, other forms. I mean, there are plenty of things to mention here in an age of Me Too and Black Lives Matter. I think this conference has not captured, is not up to date in that sense in the era that we live in, where we are supposed to know better in terms of oppression and so forth. So where are we now? Where are we now at the moment in this process? So the conference has finished on the 9th of May. We know that the European Parliament wants to trigger treaty change, so they are currently preparing for that. We do know also that there's a significant number of governments that so far is very hesitant about treaty change. 13 governments signed a non-paper saying that they don't want to rush into treaty change. They didn't say they are fully against it, but they don't want to rush into it. So I personally see currently 3 scenarios. One scenario is that there would be minor policy changes in response to the conference, which is probably what some people inside the Commission and maybe the majority inside the Council think should happen, basically. So minor changes, nothing will fundamentally change. I heard Herman Van Rompuy, former European Council president, saying this is not the time basically to open the treaties because the Pandora box of the treaties, because treaty change is a divisive issue. And in the context of an external threat, meaning Russia, Putin, we need unity. So that's one line that may prevail. The second option is that we would have minor polity changes, which I would argue is currently the majority position inside the European Parliament. This position says, yes, we do want treaty change. The conference has resulted into certain proposals that would require treaty change to be implemented. So we just have to go ahead and do that. We have to just trigger a convention, but merely the convention as a technical device to implement those proposals coming out of the conference that require treaty change to be implemented, which once again, I would say is a rather technocratic approach towards constitutional reform. Then thirdly, there's a third option, which is that there would be major polity and cultural change in the EU. And I would say this is so far not a dominant position in either of the institutions, any of the institutions, perhaps not even in civil society, but this is the one where I feel like we should mobilize as people who care for a better future, basically. The most radical option, we need to push for a convention, yes, but with the purpose of really addressing those fundamental collective traumas, recognizing the continuities between colonialism and European integration to start with, recognizing the need for reparations in the context of colonial legacies, and really dealing with these very difficult questions where Europe the EU does not always look good. Because so far the institutions try to make it very look like the EU is doing good, and I think we need a more self-critical approach. I will maybe one last minute to spend on CTUE. We've sent a letter to 3 EU presidents, Macron, von der Leyen, and Metsola, calling for a people-powered convention, essentially calling for this third option, that this conference is only the start for really fundamental change in the EU. And I would like perhaps just to highlight 2 main aspects thereof, in terms of what we have in mind for the process. What does sort of a radical convention look like, a people-powered convention? One is that marginalized groups should be fully included in that process and not sidelined as they were in the conference itself. And secondly, we also believe that an EU-wide vote should be one step in the process of changing the treaties, basically. Because I think that's the best way to signal that business as usual cannot continue, and that there's the will to turn the EU, which is traditionally an elite project, into a real project of the people. So let me finish there, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm looking forward to exchanging further with you.
Thank you, Maarten. I just want to add for our own group a couple of other things that are happening within the coalition and in this context. On one side, the idea of self-organizing citizen assemblies. As a movement, we also have this element in our own statute, like having internal sortition assemblies that can determine the process of how humans decide its own initiatives, but this is an internal instrument. But in general, I think everything that can be done as a form of self-organization to shadow the institutional process or to prove that things can work in a different way are something we should look at very carefully. And also another element that is recurrent among the coalition is something that again is very close to our interpretation, which is the fact that citizens need to know that instruments are very much available. Like the number of people that registered on the platform of the Conference on the Future of Europe, I think it's below the 20,000 or something like that. If we consider that a European citizen initiative needs to collect 1 million signatures to be audited by the Commission ultimately, I think this gives us the measure of the need of information on these processes. And of course, having a referendum at the end, potential of a constitutional process is a way to politicize, to create attention, that type of bloody thirst attention that the media need. But on the other side, the dissemination activities that the institution needs to do for this type of processes is also important. I share with all of us that one thing that I think we should try to push for is that at least the citizens that registered on the digital platform of the Conference on the Future of Europe should be constantly kept informed on any follow-up on the conference in itself. Is a database of concerned citizens that took part in the process, but in general, this goes back to the Eumans proposal of information on European, on participatory democracy processes. Just to add a layer to what Maarten said, because of course, without people knowing, it's very difficult having people involved. So it's a pillar that I think we should keep in mind. Okay, the floor to Marco to maybe add comments, and also for all of us, maybe Maarten said stuff that we don't know what they mean or we want to interact. So let's really keep the meeting an open opportunity to discuss this. Marco.
Yes, thank you very much, Virginia, and thank you, Maarten, for your presentation. I have, in fact, just some questions. First of all, how do you see the interaction between the conclusion of the conference on the future of Europe and the idea of a two-speed Europe or two circles, or I mean, how you can name it in very different ways. But it seems to me, at least in the Italian debate, that the idea that in order to overcome the veto power, there is no alternative way than creating a core group of countries which are willing to go further than others. It seems to be the idea which is taking ground, which is winning ground. So, and how do you see the interaction between this idea and the two proposals? On one side, the proposal of a convention, the classical convention on treaty reforms, because we know that for a classical treaty reform, you need the unanimity to have the adoption of the conclusion of the convention. And in some countries, this unanimity should pass through a referendum, which is not taken for granted. And on the other side, what can seem an alternative plan, the plan of having like from the bottom, like a constituent assembly, or having the European Parliament at the center of a citizens-led initiative. But there again, the problem of those countries which are unwilling to go on with this procedure, I think it would be let's say, an obstacle in both cases. So how do you see the interaction of these two problems? On the other side, if there is already an evaluation of what can be done without changing the treaties, because there were many conclusions from the Conference on the Future of Europe. If there is already an assessment of what could be doable without changing the treaty, and if it's worthwhile to have a specific campaign on what is doable without changing the treaty. Not to be satisfied with that, of course, but to have like a two-level of campaigning, one of what is possible today and another what is possible in a different constitutional framework. It seems to me quite relevant in order to in a way, to dose our energy, our efforts in this two different levels. And my third question is on what Virginia was saying about the platform. If we know something, if we know anything on about what will be done with this platform, if there is already a decision of dismissing and we have to oppose this decision, if there is only kind of ambiguity. I didn't try to get in the platform. I don't know if it's still active, what happened, and so on. So because this could be maybe a detail, but something on which we can build. Also because the use of the Decidim software can set a benchmark or a standard, that then can open the way to something like a European platform of participation. So it would be quite relevant if the EU institutions decide to keep it alive. Thank
you. But it's a good number of questions, and so maybe Maarten, you want to react already, and in the meantime I invite the others to drop your name in the chat if you want to comment or so, but I think it's already a good enough set of questions to start with.
Okay. Yeah, I don't claim to know it all, basically, in response to your questions, but I can try to make some comments. So one thing you mentioned, Marco, was the outcome of the conference and how that interacts with the debate on a two-speed EU differentiated integration. Well, to me, it's quite evident that any convention will need to address this topic, this question head on. We know de facto the EU has already sort of multiple speeds, but it's been pretty ad hoc, I guess you can say. Based on what I know, there are definitely more better experts on multi-speed Europe than I am, but I think it's there. There's de facto a multi-speed Europe already. But I do think, this question will need to continue to be addressed, because, well, we know, I think in terms of treaty change, the need for consensus will not change as far as I'm concerned. I don't see sort of a quantum leap forward towards a federal model for the EU, where basically treaty change could be decided by means of qualified majority. I don't see that happening. The EU is different from the United States, and I don't see that would be the only model in which that type of veto power could change. So given that, what I take to be a fact, I think you will need to address this question of differentiated integration. And it seems to me you need to find the right balance between, on the one hand, agreeing on differentiated integration by consensus at European Council level, and also through ratification by the member states according to each member state's constitutional requirements. But at the same time, you also want to involve the people in such decisions. Soon Denmark will have a referendum on opting in foreign and security policy, right? So arguably, maybe we would want that more to be the model, whereby the people are involved in terms of, do we want to opt in or do we want to opt out? So far, I guess treaty change feels like a train on the road towards more integration. But I think the EU has an interest in changing that image of treaty change, arguably. So that's your first question. Then you also were talking about the European Parliament at the center of sort of a citizen-led constituent assembly. To be honest, I didn't fully understand that part, so maybe you want to return to that later on. Then you were asking, is it sensible to have a campaign for focusing on those proposals that can be implemented within the current treaties? I mean, sure, if you see good proposals that are worth fighting for, definitely go for it, I would say. Anyone should go for it. Clearly, the outcome of the conference provides an opportunity to push for things. It's a stick, basically, to hit institutions with, sort of now follow up. I mean, personally, there are also some proposals coming out of the conference that I don't feel comfortable with, such as strengthening the role of Frontex, for example. But yeah, so maybe I would be careful with a generic call for saying that everything that came out of the conference is by definition good and sacred. Yeah, that's not something I'm willing to sign off on, basically. But sure, there are good things that were there, including, I guess, the idea of institutionalizing citizens' assemblies, even though there also you may wonder, can that really be done within the current treaties? Well, maybe to some extent, if you connect it to the ECI, for example, the Commission could self-oblige itself to hold a citizens panel in response to a successful European Citizens Initiative. And I guess or I'm quite sure that could be done within the current treaties if they oblige themselves and have a budget line for it. So yeah, I would then really go for targeted campaigns on specific elements, not for all proposals that can be implemented within the treaties. Then the last question, the digital platform. So the opportunity to submit ideas on the digital platform has ended, as far as I know, on the 9th of May. I think the idea is still there, and I think also the Commission has mentioned at various times that they're quite open towards sort of keeping it open. So in that sense, I think what we need is a good idea. Just keeping it open for the sake of keeping it open and not being clear about what happens with the input that people give, I don't think is a good idea. So there needs to be a plan for it. So I think anyone who can come up with a good plan and then based on that plan, campaign for keeping it open and having a clear feedback mechanism and so forth, I would say go for it. But otherwise, I'm not, citizen participation, it raises expectations, obviously. So just keeping it open for the sake of keeping it open is not good enough. So I think that the institutions need a plan. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Just trying to be more clear on the issue of the role of the parliament. You talked about the possibility of campaigning for a real citizen assembly, in a way, no? I heard from, for example, Pier Virgilio D'Astoli and the Federalist movement, the idea of having not a treaty change process through the convention, but based on the European Parliament, like Assemblea Costituente, Constituent Assembly, something like that. Do you see a margin of maneuver to merge these two ideas of having a citizens-led assembly in connection with the European Parliament, with the constituent power, something like that? I mean, it's not even clear in my mind, but do you find a path of a special relationship with the European Parliament for the citizens-led assemblies that you were talking about?
Would you like me to answer straight away, Virginia, or first check with the others?
Go reply, and I stimulate the rest of the group.
Okay. There's just that I still don't fully understand it, but if we're are we talking about treaty change? I guess we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, because then I see basically essentially there are two options. One option is to use Article 48 in the treaties, which has a clear path. There's the convention method. There's also the simplified form of changing the treaties. But let's disregard that for the moment. I don't think we're talking about that. So there's the convention method, and it says members of the European Parliament, Commission representatives, government representatives, and national parliament representatives should be part of it. So obviously the European Parliament is a key actor there. There the question is, would there be a role also for other actors? I think so. So one option is to say, well, randomly selected citizens should be part of that convention, just like they were in the conference. I'm personally not super convinced about that option. I'm more convinced about the idea of European citizens panels that feed into the convention based on very concrete questions that the convention asks them, and then they return to the convention with the outcome, and there's a dialogue, and it's sort of integrated. But if you are talking about also the option of really going around the current treaties, really basically reinventing the EU from scratch, which arguably is a bit of a tricky road, right? Some people would say it might end up in a sort of, I don't know, a sort of a no man's land where perhaps that's not successful, but it has led people to give up on the EU in its current form. I guess there's certain risks associated with that, and it seems to assume that we might lose some member states on the way, right? On that option, because then if it's not adopted by all member states, then they will not be part of the new EU. That seems to be the implication, which some might say is good, but I'm not sure. I'm not convinced about that option at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Don't be shy. So questions are open. In the meantime, I share a thing that I'm thinking, which is about the veto power and the role of Poland in that. I think, of course, we all know the problems that Poland has with the rule of law, the fact that finally some infringement procedures started. There is the pending issue of the articles, everything that can be done within the EU to kind of try to solve that problem. On the other side, we know that Poland made quite a use of the veto power, particularly when it comes to the environmental issues, for example. But at the same time, something is happening, which is the fact that Poland never had the need of European Union like now, on one side because of the migration emergency that they are living. Of course, they are very welcoming on the Ukrainian side, and whilst the border on Belarus is still shut down, the Commissioner for Human Rights of Poland came to our Congress in Warsaw, and she blatantly said this as well. But it's true that there is this element, there is the anti-Russia sentiment of Poland and the ongoing war. So I think somehow this could make more interesting for Poland to oblige to the context that it's in. And so I'm thinking to what extent the abolition of the veto power, I'm sorry if I'm very basic, but it can be on the table given the fact that there is evidently more need of European Union now that there is the war, that there is the changes in the migrant situation and so forth and so on. And so if a little miracle can happen there somehow, maybe this is also for Marco because we didn't speak about that, but
would you like me to respond, or?
want? Yes.
I mean,
yes.
but, I mean, happy to hear other people's views. I mean, the PIS MEPs that are part of the ECR group, they did vote against the amendment basically that was connected. So I'm talking about the European Parliament. There was this vote on the European Parliament on the resolution on the follow-up on the conference. And there was this specific amendment connected, or the specific vote basically on the call for the convention, and they voted against it. So that's one thing. And they also signed the non-paper, the Polish government signed the non-paper against the convention. So just for the record, so far Poland is against treaty change. Did I understand you correctly that you're saying that there might now be, given sort of the situation in Poland and the great amount of refugees, there might be more willingness to change certain things on the part of Poland and the Polish government?
Exactly. To purely simplify, basically, it's true that all the refugees waves are managed by the civil society and not by the government. That's true. On the other side, this means that since really almost every Polish person has contact with a Ukrainian person, so probably this can backfire if they don't either take the lead or take a position. And the only safety that they have as a government is to rely on the European Union somehow. Maybe it's an oversimplification, but it's not sustainable as the current situation is going.
Well, I definitely think that sort of the Visegrad countries and Hungary and Poland, that they are divided at the moment, that they're not as close in terms of the political elites as they used to be, I guess. That in a way is an opportunity for the EU to initiate reforms. Because if you have a very united opposition against changing the EU for the better, it's difficult changing the EU, and there's still opposition, but the opposition currently is less united than they were. Yeah, but in terms of the veto power, and I mean, it's quite telling basically the governments that signed this non-paper. So we are talking about Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland. Hungary did not sign. Bulgaria, Slovenia, Malta, and I'm probably still forgetting a few. But yeah, none of the founding EU members have signed it. That's one thing. So it's mostly Nordic and Eastern European, Central Eastern European countries that signed the non-paper, and mostly smaller member states. And in that sense, it is, I think, interpreted by most people as indeed a fear of losing veto power, why they signed it. So clearly it's the most central issue in the discussion on the convention currently, the veto power question.
Okay, so I guess no one has further questions. So first of all, I want to thank you, Maarten, for his work within the coalition, his depth of analysis, and also to be available for us for some deep diving. To conclude the meeting, I'd say, I don't know, Marco, if you want to say something. Next week, we will have the meeting more operational on the 28th of May mobilization for Ukraine in the EU. We launched today the first message we will do in collaboration with some Ukrainian organizations. And the idea is to have collection points and action points for the appeal all on the same day, the 28th of May, in different European cities. So far, we are confirming Naples, Milano, Warsaw, and Brussels, and Amsterdam. And we are trying to, of course, increase the action. The goal is to bring the message of Ukraine in the EU at the European Council meeting on the 23rd of September, which among its decisions to take included, hopefully, the follow-up to the conference on the future of Europe, as also on the table the request of access of Ukraine to the European Union. We will be there on the 23rd. It's already in process, the organization, to bring the Ukraine Now appeal there. Of course, the vision of the appeal is, again, another Europe, another vision for Europe. So it's closely related to what we discussed tonight. If you want to be active and do something, even simple, in the mobilization for the 28th of May, of course, you can organize a collection table, an action point, but also try to connect with the local mayors to get their support for the appeal. It's another direct action that can be done by everyone towards the 28th of May. I thank everyone for the attention.
Grazie. Thank you, Maarten. And thanks, everybody.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Thanks. Bye.